I want to speak for a few minutes about the hearings going on today with Judge Brett Kavanaugh. I had a chance, as you did, to meet him a little over a month ago. It was clear from that conversation that he is clearly the best person available, in my view, to fill the vacancy left by Justice Anthony Kennedy. His opening remarks this week, I think, gave great evidence to that. He described himself, quote, he said, a judge must be an umpire, a neutral and impartial arbiter who favors no litigant or policy. He went on to say, I do not decide cases based on personal or policy preferences. I am not a pro-plaintiff or pro-defendant judge. I am not a pro-prosecution or pro-defense judge. I am a pro-law judge. That ends the quote of that comment he made describing himself. What does that mean to be a pro-law judge? It means that you see your job as the job of the judge is to look at the law and determine what the law says, whether that's the criminal law or the civil law. If you hire an attorney, I'm not an attorney, but if you hire an attorney to give you advice on the civil law, the greatest benefit you can have of making a decision based on that advice is that judges at all levels up to the Supreme Court will look at the law as your hopefully good attorney did and say, this is what this law means. If you make this decision based on what the law says, the courts in the United States of America will reach that same likely conclusion. Now, your attorney might say the law is not clear on this issue, and that's a different thing, but the judge's job is not to decide what's the right thing. The judge's job is not to decide what the law should say. The judge's job is not to decide what the people who wrote the Constitution should have written or should have meant if they had known everything we know today. The judge's job is to look at the law and look at the Constitution and decide that's what it said. Now, nothing would be a better example of Judge Kavanaugh's philosophy than the 300 opinions he's issued as a judge. There's a lot of discussion about, well, there's not enough material out there. We haven't seen everything. We haven't seen everything that went through the White House when he was the staff secretary for President Bush, Bush 43, George W. Bush. We haven't seen all that. Of course, that's not the case. There's plenty to be seen. In fact, there's more paperwork available to look at from Judge Kavanaugh than for the last 5 Supreme Court judges put together. If you're looking for paper, you got paper. If you're looking for the judge's position, you've also got that. You've got 300 cases, some of which were appealed to the Supreme Court, 13 of his almost exact opinions, and I think some of them were when he was in the minority on the circuit court bench, became the opinion that the Supreme Court essentially adopted almost exactly as Judge Kavanaugh had written it. You know, what we're trying to do here is put somebody on the Supreme Court for a lifetime appointment, and this individual happens to be somebody who for 12 years has been on what is often described as the second most important court in the country. Now, why would the D.C. Circuit, that's the Court of Appeals for the D.C. area, why would the D.C. Circuit be the second most important court in the country? Because the reason is because most of the cases that involve new federal law, that involve expansive federal law, wind up right here. And Judge Kavanaugh for 12 years has been one of those judges. And believe me, if the Supreme Court had said over and over again, when there's an appeal from the D.C. Circuit, Judge Kavanaugh's opinion really makes no sense, or Judge Kavanaugh's opinion wasn't based on the law, the facts, and the Constitution, we would have heard about that. 300 opinions, we would have heard about that if that would have been the case, and we have not heard about that. In fact, what we've heard over and over again is the job that the judge has done and the skill he brings to the court. You know, back to that idea that the judge's goal is not to decide what the judge would like the outcome to be, but what the law says. I think Judge Scalia, who was replaced last year by Judge Kavanaugh, Judge Scalia said, the judge who always likes the results he reaches is not a good judge. The judge who always likes the result he reaches, in fact, let me give you the exact quote, says, is a bad judge. So why would you be a bad judge if you always liked the goals you reached? Well, the reason is you couldn't always be looking at the law because the judge didn't write the law, the judge didn't come up with the law, the judge didn't even have to agree with the law. The judge's job is to decide what the law says. If you look at every case before you, if you evaluate it based on the facts and apply the rule of law, you're going to come up with a conclusion that you won't always like, but you'll come up with a conclusion that the people that are in this case will understand where you came up with it because you came up with it based on the law and the facts. Judge Kavanaugh's credentials have been discussed before. Frankly, they're not being very widely discussed this week because the hearing appears not to, in at least half the time, not to have much to do with Judge Kavanaugh at all. But whether there's enough paperwork to look at, whether a judge would have reached a different conclusion than he reached. But his qualifications are pretty significant. He's a graduate of Yale Law School. He clerked for 3 federal judges, including the judge he's about to replace. And of course, being a clerk for a judge means you've graduated from law school. Someone's looked at all the applicants to be their clerk and learn almost that kind of like a graduate work after you've graduated from law school, and you're chosen to be that clerk. So that happened 3 times with Judge Kavanaugh, including Justice Kennedy. He clerked for Justice Kennedy alongside Justice Gorsuch. In 2006, President Bush nominated him to serve on the D.C. Court of Appeals. In addition to that, since 2009, he's been a lecturer, the Samuel Wilkinson lecturer in law at Harvard Law School. He was hired by Justice Kagan, who before she was nominated to the court by President Obama was the dean of Harvard Law School. Have the interesting opportunity, if he's confirmed to the court, and I believe he will be, to be sitting on the court with a judge nominated by Justice Obama, but a judge that hired him to be a lecturer at Yale Law School. In addition to his legal career, he's really devoted himself to his community. He works coaching his daughter's basketball team with some pride. Coach K, not always the Coach K I would think of, but the Coach K the girls on that team think of when they think of Coach K. He's a church volunteer. He's mentoring people at schools. He has been widely supported by those who have dealt with him, his classmates, his colleagues, his clerks, lawyers, legal scholars. This week, he unanimously received a well-qualified rating from the American Bar Association. This is the very highest rating they could give. It's unanimous. That's a pretty good signal that he must be well prepared as a lawyer to be a judge. The Judiciary Committee's received letters from more than 140 law professors, more than 40 members of the Supreme Court Bar, 34 of his former law clerks, 80 former Harvard law students, 31 governors, and many more. His nomination isn't just widely supported, it's thoroughly vetted. 480,000 pages of documents, 300 cases opinions he has written. I continue to believe that the Supreme Court is one of the long-lasting and most important legacies of a president, but it's also one of the important legacies of a Senate. The Constitution says the president nominates, but the Senate advises and consents. And this is not just about advice, it's about becoming a partner in that process, in becoming a member of the Supreme Court for as long as you live, unless you decide to leave earlier than that. Disappointed that almost half of the Senate announced that they wouldn't be for Judge Kavanaugh before his confirmation hearings, but at least a fourth of the Senate announced they wouldn't be for Judge Kavanaugh before he was nominated. No matter who was going to be nominated, a fourth of the Senate was not going to be there. I think we'll find that a majority of the Senate will be there later this month. I think we'll find a majority of the Senate will be there before the first Monday in October, which is the day that the court starts to hear the cases for the coming year. I think Judge Kavanaugh is going to serve our country well, and I hope long, and look forward to his confirmation later this month. And I would yield the floor.